All right, folks. Typically, biggest game in the ACC. We're used to that. Clemson, Florida State, when they get together. This year, it's a bit of survival mode for the Noles, and Clemson playing for what could be another championship for them. But when the two get together, maybe they forget all their outside aspirations, and maybe it turns out to be a pretty good football game. We shall see. Appreciate you being here at FSU Live, right here at the Voice of College Football. Georgitis, of course, from the Renegade Report, anchoring for us, keeping this thing afloat. My apologies, everyone. What happened was, like I was saying to George, this is the downfall to having like a ridiculous network of like 82 shows going on at the same time. I grabbed the Clemson link for the Clemson show that's going to be in 2 hours because it said Florida State preview on it. So I just saw Florida State. And I was sitting there waiting for George thinking, oh, he just must be late and just waiting and waiting. But here we are. George, how you doing tonight?
I'm the worst about putting because, Florida State is Eastern time, but I'm Central. So is Jen. So I'm always telling people Eastern times because that's, how we advertise it. Every once in a while, I'll set it in StreamYard for that hour past. It happens. But no, just happy to be here. Kind of similar as I've talked about with the Miami game on the 26th. You're just kind of praying to the rivalry gods.
Yes.
You get Clemson at home. You look back at what Georgia's been the last couple of weeks versus what they did against Clemson week 1 is kind of like a different. So in the back of my mind, you think, okay, well, maybe our offensive or defense, if they get something going. But at the same time, like that team got it together. I remember seeing a drive chart where it was like punt, 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 interception, turnover, punt, punt, interception, turnover. And then it went touchdown, 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 touchdown. It was basically nothing but touchdowns after the Georgia game. I haven't looked how they did or looked at too much tape from last week yet. It's a tough road to hoe going forward for the Seminoles, and we can talk about kind of any part of it. You mentioned it. It's a prime time matchup. This is the one all ACC ABC game for the first 7 weeks of the season. It's FSU Clemson at 7:00. It's the only one. And it goes to the conversation we've had a ton about what's going to go with the ACC moving forward. We've had the time slot arguments and stuff. Well, this is a pretty perfect case study with Florida State being down as they are, Clemson getting dominated week 1. The ACC has just shown everybody, ESPN has, I guess ESPN is more who has the decision here, that look, if Clemson and Florida State ain't up, if they ain't, moving the needle, they're just not going to put someone else in that time slot. Even Miami, as great as they've been, haven't gotten it here and, aren't going to get it until at least week 8 when guess who comes to town. And I don't think that's even going to happen now. I'm just saying that would be the first opportunity since they have it scheduled out through 7 weeks. But bam, it just goes to show. And yeah, we're not pulling our numbers or not pulling our weight, but, figured that'd be something you'd like to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. We can stop right here and go over this because it's important to realignment. It's important to talking about status of programs and so forth. And of course, we'll get to the football, but obviously the football is much diminished. And this is not the game we expected it to be at this point. We thought Florida State would probably be 5-0, maybe 4-1, not 1-4. And of course, that effort against SMU in Dallas was dismal on Saturday. And we expected Clemson to be pretty much where they are right now because they were a pretty big underdog against Georgia. They had a puncher's chance going into the game, but we figured they'll lose that game, wipe out everybody else, and that's pretty much what it's been. So getting back to the TV side of it. So I have made the point, and I don't want people to get confused or to over-accentuate the point that I'm making.
Devil's advocate. I mean, somebody has to rein us Knowles in and drive the other side, guys. Don't holler.
The point that you are making is, I'll put a percentage on it. I'm not saying that it's exactly correct, of course. The point that you're making is 90% of the equation. The point that I'm about to make is like 10% of the equation. So obviously, the TV networks, they go to the bargaining table for a reason. And I don't know right now the way, of course, ABC and ESPN being one entity, and then the ACC network, the SEC network, all of that being one entity, they can pretty much take, for example, the SEC and the ACC and schedule those games wherever they want now, because they have no share. Prior to this season, of course, the Big Ten, for example, was with Fox and with ESPN and ABC. And so that they would have to work together, and they had a whole selection process of, okay, Fox gets the first one, then ABC gets the second, et cetera, involving the Big Ten, for example. But now it's all self-contained within when we look at the ACC with all of Disney. So they can pretty much just put the games wherever that is best for them.
They're just choosing between the SEC and the ACC. I mean, that's
exactly
their two. And who are they going to pick?
Absolutely. They're going to pick the SEC games most of the time, but there are a few ACC games that obviously are going to stand out, like this one every year. And so the point we're getting to, folks, is that they're obvious brands, and we could list them and they would be easy to list. Now, what order they are, we could get into all sorts of arguments over that and look at TV ratings, whether Notre Dame's number one or Ohio State's number one or whoever's number one, Alabama's number one. But Florida State's like in the top 5 to 8. So there's no question about that, even at their current state. And that's why Disney chooses, okay, we got ESPN, and on primetime, we're going with Florida State and Clemson, even with Florida State being a lousy football team at 1-4. I haven't looked at the rest of the primetime lineup. Do we know who's playing on ABC?
I'm not sure. It's Florida State and Clemson. That's it. That's the only.
They're
that's what ABC. That's what I was speaking to. The primetime spot on ABC, the only one from the first 7 weeks. It's 7 other SEC games, or 6 other SEC games. I believe 7, because there's like a double header on one of them. Just this is it. FSU Clemson. That's it. I'm
sorry, I confused it there. Yeah, Tennessee Arkansas is the ESPN game. That's right, on Saturday night. So yeah, the point that I've made in the past, just to counter George's point, and again, this is not a 50-50 counterpunch at all. What the TV networks tell us, basically, by their selections, who brings in the eyeballs. That's all there is to it. The point that I'm making is that there are indicators, there have been studies done that there is some influence by what network at what time and who you're going to watch. Like if Clemson Florida State is on ABC on Saturday night versus if they hid them somewhere on ESPNU at the same time, there would just be people that just, I'm watching ABC's Saturday night college football game, and they just click it on. I'm not, again, that's 10% of it, roughly.
It's true. It's true. But the networks know that if they put, Syracuse, Virginia on ABC, and they put FSU Clemson on ESPN2, you're throwing away all that advantage, and now you're going to do better numbers on ESPN2 to spite ABC. And that's the thing. And if Florida State came into the season and did what we were supposed to do, you think it would have been just 1 out of 7 prime spots for FSU? I think not. I think one of the other ones would have been there, and you'd have one already scheduled down the road. It's just kind of, how it played out. Like, it's just, there's not enough. And like you said, Notre Dame, you can name the teams outside of Florida State, Clemson, and Miami. If they keep rolling, if they can, show what they're doing, there's just, with what the SEC has, there's not many times those TV execs are going to sit around the table and pick an ACC team. And when you're looking at this February 1st, 2025 deadline, I mean, these lawyers and ESPN people aren't idiots. Like, with FSU, Clemson in the conference, there's not meat on the bone for them to pay the escalating amount that grant of rights is. And so we keep going back to, it's going to have to be some kind of restructured deal. But I think their answer is to figure out how to get FSU and Clemson in. Outside of that, it's a bomb. But I don't want to go all the way down that road. But anyways, I just thought that piece of that stat to come out about the primetime matchups is pretty glaring. And then when you look at like the Big 12 numbers that we talked about ad nauseum in the offseason, these teams that people were saying this and that, and a lot of people talking about FSU, their numbers are 500,000 views, 1 million, and that's supposed to be outside of Colorado, those Big 12 numbers, tough, tough, tough. And you think ESPN is going to sit down and look at that? It's just a lot. It's really looking more and more, especially with the SEC and the SEC and the Big Ten coming out saying they want 8 auto bids. Like, it is what it is. It's going to be the P2, and if you want to compete at the highest level for a national championship, you're either going to have to join or not. It's just all there is to it. Notre Dame, if they can figure out how to schedule 8 of those games, they could possibly still do it. But yeah, it's going to be 1 or 2 teams from the ACC. Like, I could see them moving it to 16 teams, and you still only get 1 from the ACC, 1 from the Big 12, 1 from the Pac-12, something like that. Like, the disparity is unreal, and the perception gap just keeps growing. Like, like Kentucky. Like, is Kentucky a top 10 team, or is South Carolina, who beat Kentucky 31-6, are they that good, or is it's really hard to tell. But at the end of the day, the true championship people, and Florida State's not a championship team this year by any means, but the people that pull the eyeballs, 99% of them are in 2 conferences. That's just how it is. You're not going to be able to. It's like you had WCW and WWE at one point in time. There were 2 monsters on TV, Mondays, Thursdays, Sundays, and they went back to back. They both had these star-studded lineups, but little by little, the WWF started getting them, picking them off. The ECW came around. You can call them the Pac-12. They picked one here, picked one there. This other little thing, TNT, Impact, they took 1 or 2. Next thing you know, the WCW is out of business. They're absorbed, or the WCW is absorbed by the WWE, and there is no WCW. Like, that's just where college football is going. The Big Ten and the SEC are gobbling everything up, and the rest is G5 or whatever you want to call it. I mean, you look at the teams that the Pac-12's putting together, and What happened to the Big 12. It's a different sport.
I'll make one last statement, then we'll bring our guest in here to talk Clemson, Florida State on the field this Saturday. But just to wrap it up here, and we'll, of course, get into this on a future date again and into the off season. We do a breakdown of all the TV ratings here at the Voice of College Football every off season, which I love. I'm a TV guy, been in the TV industry since I was 22 years old. So that always intrigues me, TV ratings, making comparisons and so forth. Take the Big 12, for example. The Big 12, I don't have the numbers right here now, but of course I displayed them on the video. With Texas and Oklahoma leaving, they took with them something like 14, I'm almost certain I got it now, 14 of the top 17 rated games in the conference they took with them to the SEC. Nobody's going to be watching the Big 12. And I'm not hammering on the Big 12. I'm just stating facts. I like watching a Big 12 game. I watched Utah, Oklahoma State a couple of weeks ago. I will watch Big 12 football. I'm just stating facts. And then when you take the Big 10, which is loaded with power brands, and you add in the 4 that they gained, for example, the week before last, your number 1 game was USC and Michigan. Well, that game didn't exist as a regular season game just 2 years ago. Now, boom, it's the biggest. It's got 12 million views. And so those conferences are just
this is what I tried to explain to people. These ratings, these viewers aren't coming out of a vacuum. Your 2 biggest fan bases are Oklahoma and Texas. They're watching all these Big 12 games because they've got, blood in it. Now they're watching SEC. And it's like whatever, 30% or 40% they had figured for what Oklahoma and Texas was. We've talked about that a lot. It's a slippery slope. It's exponential because, everything rolls off of that.
That's a great point. That's a great point. We'll finish with that one because what George is saying is Texas and Oklahoma aren't just taking their viewership of their games. But if you're an Oklahoma fan and your team's got a bye week, or you just got done watching your team, or you're waiting for the primetime game and you're going to watch a 3:30 game, you're more than likely going to be interested in your league. And so you're going to watch the best Big 12 game of the week, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, whoever. But now that's gone. Those teams don't exist to you anymore. You don't care. So you're just adding more interest into
Colorado is going to be getting a lot of calls as this thing goes forward. They want Colorado to win out, buddy. I'll tell you that.
All right. Oh, we got Jordan Bowman showing up. Look at this. Appreciate Jordan being here. So Jordan and Tiger Paw Craven every Wednesday night on our Clemson channel, 8 p.m. Eastern time. They do a phenomenal show. and then also the post-game show. But we got Jordan here to break down some Clemson football for us. Jordan, what's going on?
Yeah, nothing much, man. Just excited for this week. This is one of the matchups that I look forward to every single year. Most Clemson fans do. Obviously, it's not doesn't have the same picture and the same hype that maybe we thought in the preseason. But this is at the end of the day, and y'all were just talking about TV ratings and brand value. I mean, these are the two biggest brands in the conference, whether they're good or bad. And this is the matchup that the ACC is always going to need to prop up in order to generate as much revenue as possible. So I'm just excited to get into it. And, I love coming on here to break down some Clemson, even on another channel. So I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So let's do this. I'll get us started. I'll get you started with a question out of me, and then I'll let you guys kick it back and forth, and I can just lean back and soak up the knowledge. So, Jordan, obviously, the easy narrative with Clemson this year is they played Georgia. They got blown out. If anybody didn't watch the game, but if you watched the game, you saw an extremely competitive first half. And then you saw Georgia come out with 2 long drives and put it away, and Clemson fell apart from there. Then you see 56 in the first half against App State. And I know App State's down. And so now that they've proven to be down, there's some consideration given there. But basically, they've wiped out App State, NC State. Again, the score not indicative of that game. I got bored at 28-zip. It was not a football game. It was just a wipeout. And then they take care of Stanford by 4 touchdowns this past week. So how much do we buy into Clemson being, there's a standard, obviously, that Dabo is forged here with what we expect out of Clemson football. How much of this is what would be considered real versus the opponent?
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately the biggest question and kind of the thing that, most Clemson fans have been trying to wrestle with, just with these last few results. For me personally, I buy into most of what we've seen. I think it's very clear that Clemson's offense has taken a significant step forward. Now, how much, that'll translate into, hey, you go and play a Georgia or an Alabama or an Ohio State or one of these like national championship contenders with talent on defense, like top of the line talent on defense. Are you still going to be able to put up those same kind of production and numbers? Yeah, probably not. But I think that ultimately we're seeing the growth of this Clemson offense, Cade Klubnik in particular. And I think they have significantly raised the ceiling of maybe what we thought this team was going into the year. At least you feel like you have a really good shot at competing for an ACC title and a playoff berth. Beyond that, remains to be seen.
Yeah, man. I'll ask you about Cade first, because I was talking to Mark before you got here, and it's like, the offensive chart for Georgia was like punt, interception, punt. And then after that, it was, crazy. Y'all went on 10, 12, 13 touchdown drives in a row or something. Cade looking a lot better. How much do you buy into that improvement? Do you think he's made like a real big step, or like Mark was kind of alluding to, is it kind of who you've been playing? It's almost like, to me, I'm not going to predict a win or anything close. I'm predicting Clemson blowout, but I think Florida State could hold this thing tight at half. It's almost like a bit of comfort playing a team they play every year. Maybe they'll settle down at home. You can see the home crowd get them fired up. Florida State's issue has been like getting anything together. It just kind of falls apart. The second halves have been nightmares. You see Cade being able to kind of come in here and just be a businessman and take care of a team that's just wounded. Or is there still a little bit of, all right, this is Florida State, we're going into Doak Campbell, even though the defense hasn't been exactly what it's supposed to be and the offense is garbage, there could be some plays to be made for Florida State as well on defense even anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really another thing that we've, as Clemson fans have noticed over the past year is that, if you go look at Cade's home versus road splits, at least in his first year starting, there was a very significant difference. And so the one game you've played this year away from a Memorial Stadium was obviously that 34-3 loss to Georgia. So, we really don't know what Cade looks like this year on the road, and especially in an environment like Doak Campbell. So ultimately, that's going to be a test of whether or not, this offense is just, really, really good at home. But when they get into hostile environments, like they're going to fold under pressure, or at least they don't have the benefit of the home crowd, like they're going to fold under pressure. That's one of the things that I really want to see this weekend, and see kind of how the offense functions without the crowd, being behind them. Because the last 3 games, the execution especially from the first team has been about as good as we've seen it from a Clemson offense in about 4 years. And so the playmakers, you feel like you have a really, really strong group of wide receivers, running back Phil Maffa, and your offensive line has played about as well as we've seen a Clemson offensive line under Dabo Swinney so far. So we got to see if that translates and that travels, because if it doesn't, then your outlook on the season looks a little bit different.
Feels like Moffa's been there forever, man. He's really grown into a nice player. Like, I'm not trying to tell you about a player, but it seems like he didn't come out the gate. Shipley was still there, but he's somebody that grew into a role that's legit. I'm sure he's in all the conversations for all ACC back this year. I haven't watched a ton of y'all's film, but Florida State's biggest weakness on defense has been giving up the run and then conversions on big plays. Seems like maybe Clemson would protect Cade a little bit. Like, you think with this offense, like if they're running at 3-4 yards a clip, will they just keep hammering it down the middle? Or are we going to see y'all throw it 20, 30 times regardless, kind of, with this offense this year?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, at least through these 4 games, we've seen this offense with Garrett Riley. The offense has always been, we're going to do what works, and if it keeps working, we're gonna stick with it. But this year, it's really just been, what's been working is taking shots. So they've ran the ball really efficiently, but they haven't had a lot of attempts. Phil Maffa only has about I don't know it off the top of my head. He doesn't have a whole lot of carries on the season, but he's running at a good clip, almost 8 yards per carry. But really, the hallmark of what this offense is doing, it's pretty good.
That's Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook averaged it, on his almost when he got back for Heisman.
Don't remind me about Dalvin. Man, I wish he had ended up in Clemson. But so things are trending up. That's what the part of the Clemson offense that hasn't been able to be unlocked for the better part of 3 seasons. So that's what they've been doing. They've been taking a lot of shots, whether it's been between Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco, Jake Brenningstool. They've really made a concerted effort this year. Cole Turner, they've made a concerted effort this year to bring the explosive passing plays back to Clemson. So I think you're going to see them attempt to get big plays through the passing game in this game, even if the run game is having some success.
Have those helmets? What do you think? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say 8.0. You nailed it, Jordan.
Yeah, I'm usually pretty good with stats. I'm disappointed I couldn't remember how many carries he had, but
pretty healthy. 8 yards a clip. How many carries does he have? 43 carries for 240 something yards. Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm pretty good. Get plenty of action.
I'm pretty good with stats too, but I don't have one for this. But I know from watching football forever, like 45 years, longer than I would like to admit, that we've seen this situation before. And again, if I went through football history, I could start to pluck the teams that are really talented, that have history, that have tradition. I'm obviously talking about Florida State, but are having a bad season, down season, coming off the rails, that are dangerous, that come together maybe for one stretch of play, 1 week. They see a certain color, they see a certain name, Clemson, and they pull it together for one effort. Maybe there's a rally cry in the locker room. Hey guys, we've wasted this season. We don't like those guys. Let's kick some tail. Let's kick some ass on this game. Let's salvage our season some way. And again, I don't have the metric to say that this is frequent, but I just know that it happens, and that makes Florida State dangerous.
Absolutely. And I think you saw this exact same scenario in reverse, not exact same, but close to the same scenario last year when these two teams faced off. Clemson had already taken the loss to Duke in the opening week, and they didn't look great in their following two games, heading into that game. And so, there was, Florida State was a favorite, coming into Death Valley, and, they put together one of their better efforts of the year, even in a loss. Cade played one of his better games. And you have the intrigue with Florida State of starting Brock Glenn, who hasn't seen a ton of action this year. And, there's always some level of excitement and kind of rejuvenation in a roster when there's a quarterback change, especially since, there probably were some contingents within that roster that wanted to see Brock Glenn be out there. So that's going to be really interesting to see. It's a tough ask, for it to be his first start of the year against Clemson, but we've seen it before. So maybe his a little bit more athletic and just the youth factor, it might be enough to unlock a part of this Florida State offense. So that'll be intriguing to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, Mike did it in 2020 when he took out a top 5 UNC team. And then 21, you open up, you almost beat Notre Dame. Then you go over and 4. Everybody knows the story. But you end the year 5-3. You take down Miami and a couple other really good teams. This team particularly, I'm not going to lead the bandwagon. I'm not going to predict it. But you took the words out of my mouth. Switching to Brock, I could definitely see some fire. And whether he's been better at practice, is he a better option? He's certainly a more fiery guy, a more emotional guy, and as you mentioned, much quicker on his feet. So plenty of options there. I think I've been calling for it all year. I think maybe you see the Wildcat from Lawrence Toafili in this game for the first time. That bears to be seen. I think our squad has kind of found the guys to get out there, like kind of compared to the beginning of the season. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Down here. It seemed like a kicked puppy, but when you're sitting here doing the math to try to figure out how you have to win this thing for Florida State, we're going to need a couple turnovers. We're going to have to really limit positions and things of that nature, or possessions, excuse me. But just looking at the FSU defense, as far as matching up, what are your first thoughts? We've struggled with Banjo all year long. I'm sure your coaches have seen that, and Garrett Riley's offense, widely discussed last year, is not exactly the Garrett Riley offense we've seen everywhere. People kind of accuse Dabo of just kind of making him run his offense. I don't think that's true. It's somewhere in the middle, as you kind of alluded to earlier. But do you see y'all having some things to really make us pay for that, to lose guys in coverage? Because like you said, y'all got all them receivers, like best receivers in a long time. I'm sure that offense is I don't know how many penalties you guys have. Like, we have more penalties than we had the entire last year on the offensive line.
Wow.
Already.
Yeah,
So
I did not know that. Yeah, I mean, I think that, watching Florida State's defense, it's very clear, especially in the last few weeks, it's very clear that, that's the strength of the team. And I definitely see more NFL players on that side of the ball, and they've played well at times. So I think that's going to be the ultimate test for Clemson, because while Florida State is struggling this year, as far as their roster and the quality of athlete that they have, that's different than anything that NC State had, or App State had, or Stanford had. So, how does this team respond to that, playing that level of athlete, even if the team as a cohesive unit isn't as strong? That's another big question. And so you combine all that, if Florida State is going to want to muddy this game up, I know they've been a really, really slow tempo team. Maybe that changes with Brock Glenn, but I know with DJ, it was very, very, low possessions and trying to, keep the game close. So, you have that variance, because if you giving the other team more possessions was not going in their favor. Clemson is going to want to speed the game up. That's a Garrett Riley thing. They play with tempo. They want to speed things up. Not all the time, but I think in a game like this, they're going to want to be able to dictate the tempo. So that's going to be another thing to watch this Saturday, because if Florida State can get Clemson to play their tempo, I think that increases the likelihood of them potentially coming out with a win if they can get some other things as well.
get Toafili to luckily just like land on one of y'all's DBs and roll over and go for a touchdown.
I was at that game. Man, that was one of the wildest, touchdowns I think I've ever. And man, that makes me realize how long Lawrence Toafili has been there. Because that was what, 2021, I think. I think that was
21 or 22, something like that.
I think that might have been my last year at Clemson. That was, that was crazy. But yeah, he's a talented back. I don't know why Florida State hasn't made an effort to get him the ball more, because he's clearly one of y'all's better weapons. Just his speed. He's grown as a runner. They kind of used him as a scat back in his career, I remember, but now I think he's become a more complete back. And that other running back, Cam Davis, I think he's really talented as well. So I think that's what Florida State is going to want to lean on. And that's another thing I wanted to mention is Clemson's defense while they are really, really talented up front, they've had issues this season, setting the edge. If you watched the Stanford game, if you watched the late in the NC State game, even the Georgia game, the teams have been attacking them on the edge, especially with Peter Woods being out, because the depth at that position has not been as strong as in years past as well. So I think Florida State is going to attempt to take advantage of that as well. And I think that could be something if Clemson isn't if they aren't more sound in that area, Florida State could put some drives together and keep Clemson's offense off the field.
It sure would be nice. It's been a struggle. Our offensive line has got 13,000 some odd snaps on it. Been the same guys. As I mentioned earlier, I think we've got 19 or 20 offensive line penalties already, and we had like 17 all last year. So being at home, being with Brock, we're going to see. I truly believe what you said. It's almost like you're giving me a pep talk. Like, if Florida State can keep it close, and if Marvin Jones and Pat Payton can have, especially Pat Payton, have as good of a game as he's had in the past against Clemson, I think we could get close. But as we get to the end here, I'll go ahead and give a prediction. My issue with the game is just, as much crap as I've talked about Dabo and made fun of the recruiting and things like that, there's somebody who's been here over a decade. The consistency of kind of the business-like nature, I don't see us being able to keep it together for 4 quarters to get that win. And every game I've picked FSU, the first 3 or 4 games that I picked, we lost. So maybe I can put some reverse psychology in there. But my prediction would be kind of what I said. I see a fire from these guys. I do think they come out pumped up behind Brock. Maybe he even makes a big play early. Maybe we get a turnover or something like that. But just to keep punching it and play after play, get into the second half, I would see Clemson pulling away with some kind of 40 to something. If Florida State gets to 20 points, I think that would be a big plus. But we shall see. There's, the rivalry gods, they exist. It's not quite Miami, Florida State, but Clemson is as big as it gets outside of that in the ACC. And we've seen crazy things, as you mentioned. Like last year on paper, we probably should have won that game by a couple touchdowns, but it took overtime. So if we can even carry this game into the 3rd quarter, get it close to the 4th quarter close, that would be a giant step for this team moving forward. And hopefully they get something they can build off of. As Florida State fans, the biggest fear is, you throw Brock Glenn out there and he gets knocked down, and then you're stuck with 2 freshmen for the rest of the year. So going to be very interesting to see how Mike Norvell calls this one. But a lot of storylines. I mean, I'm sure on your channel or, on the Clemson Voice of College Football, I'm sure there's a lot of talk about transfer portal talk and how one team doesn't use it and yada, yada, and the consistency. But I guess I can ask you that question because, Florida State, obviously y'all's goal isn't to be good enough to beat a 1-4 Florida State team. It's about competing for playoffs and national championships. Do you think Dabo's ever going to change? Do you think he's justified with what you've seen thus far? Or are you looking at it and saying, maybe next year we've got to go after it? Or you think he's just completely justified with this kind of take on it?
I think I share a lot of Clemson fans' frustrations at times with Dabo's approach to that. I do think that Clemson needs to be better about it. I think there's a misconception that Dabo is completely like anti-transfer portal, but he certainly prefers to add talent in the high school ranks, and he's always going to take a high school kid before he goes in the portal. And, this past offseason, they wanted to go and get a couple of offensive linemen in the transfer portal. They offered a couple of guys, and they didn't land them. That's honestly my biggest concern, is that when you do want to go into the transfer portal, you're not hitting, because it happened, a couple of years ago as well. So I think really ultimately with Dabo's approach, I think it remains to be seen. Like, I'm still kind of in wait and see, because you're kind of seeing an upswing, and potentially this could be a year where his dedication to the guys he brings in out of high school and he develops, pays dividends. I mean, at least it seems like things are starting to come together, especially on the offensive side of the ball, in a way that it hasn't in a long time. So, we'll see kind of how it goes, and who you bring back next year will probably play a role in whether or not they decide to go into the portal. But yeah, I'm still kind of in wait and see. But I do think that Clemson needs to be in better position to attack the transfer portal if they feel like they need to, because you just you can't lose offensive linemen to Georgia Tech and Penn State. Well, Penn State's kind of understandable, but Georgia Tech, certainly, kind of sort of in your backyard, your recruiting grounds, and they're, you're losing, transfer portal battles to them. And who's the kid that went to
got us too, man. They got a high school kid. Georgia Tech spending some money right now.
Yeah, they're cooking right now. They've got their funds up a little bit. So, but you get my point. Like, it's ultimately like you need to be able to attack it when necessary, when you deem it necessary. And so that's what I'm waiting to see. And maybe when revenue sharing and the consolidation of, what's allowed as far as player compensation, kind of has a clearer picture, maybe you'll see Clemson have more success in that space. But right now, I'm pleased with how Dabo has constructed his staff in order to get the most out of the high school kids he gets, and so we'll see whether or not he can Clemson as a whole can be more opportunistic, I guess is probably the right word, when transfer portal opportunities arise.
Tough. It's one of those things, like, you'd like to just be able to jump in there, but if you're not used to the waters, you're going to drown. So like, if you don't take anybody for 2 years, you just take one. It's like, oh, if I go to Clemson as the portal, if you're a kid, you got to imagine like the other guys or whatever. Just perception. I'm not saying it's true or anything, but
you're absolutely right.
Kind of kids how they look at it, and maybe going to 105 scholarships. The comment here, the $4 or $1, $5 super chat there from Nathan Forrester says Dabo will use the portal when tampering is addressed. That makes sense. When they have the $25 million salary cap that's supposed to supposedly come in 2025 and things of that nature, that would make it more sense. Just curious on your thoughts, because I know that's a really hot topic around college football. Miami goes and gets Cam Ward. That's a pretty big, if that's the difference in the ACC, not that they would have got somebody to take over for Cade Klubnik. Just saying.
I get you. Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be a continued talking point until Clemson, goes to the playoff and has success, and more like what they were from 2015 to 2020. That's always going to be a talking point. So or until they make the decision and they finally have success in the transfer portal, then that's
it's opposite for us, because like, we so quote unquote killed it in the portal till this class, but haven't done so well in high school. It's like the total opposite. It's like, well, damn, we went 13-1. That covered up all those deficiencies in high school recruitings, and now where we're at, as a Clemson fan, I may be sitting there like, damn, we're going to be this good this year, and so now he's going to be able to stand there and no more portal stuff with where the sport's going. So, anyways, I figured I'd ask you about
that's
that.
one of those things. It's like, oh, I hope he doesn't just completely harden his stance and say, well, we're not. You see, we had a really good year. Who needs the portal? So, and that's ultimately these two programs have kind of gone about it in very nearly polar. It's not Colorado level portal reliance, but very clearly on opposite ends of the spectrum as far as that. And I think both programs could fit, could do well to find more of a middle ground.
For sure.
Yeah, I think it could be easily argued that going into the season that Florida State, although the quantity hasn't been Colorado level, the quality has been the best in the nation. What they were able to produce in 2022 and 23 in particular. Wow, the impact was above anybody else.
Until it wasn't, huh?
Until it was.
And you spoke to it, or the comment spoke to it. Dabo, wait until maybe, if that's what's in his mind, until tampering's over. That Florida State got burned. They were in it at the beginning, and they were the very best. I think a lot of what happened in the 2024 class is everybody kind of caught up. You weren't getting the first phone call, and that guy's locked in. Like 2022 class, and especially, like, I'm not going to brag or anything. When I first started doing this, I had no inside sources. But just it was so loud, and you were able to follow like kids' locations and things. And this guy's already got an apartment, and he hasn't even hit the portal yet in Tallahassee. It's like we got all those. We scooped all those just off perception and guessing, not inside sources. This year, none of that. You had everybody you thought you got an article ready for. Oh, he's off the table. Nick Skirton, Kyle Kennard, a lot of these guys. It's just like anything else. They found a money ball part of college football, and as it, everybody else saw it and said, okay, let's do the same thing. So, yeah, I totally agree. We should move towards what Clemson's doing, and I not that Florida State fan can say anything about what Clemson's doing right now, but yeah, I'm sure y'all wouldn't mind being able to get some of these top players in, like a Braden Fisk or a Cam Ward or whoever the case may be, for 1 year.
Absolutely.
We don't have too much time, but I want to hit on a couple things here real quick. So the one would be, well, since we've hit the transfer portal and we're talking about these two programs that are so different in their approach, I'll ask George, do Florida State fans, and I'm using the word hate, but in a sports term, although some of them probably do they hate Dabo Swinney?
No, I wouldn't call it hate. I think it's a lovable kind of, ribbing back and forth,
Okay.
The whole Forrest Gump memes and things of that nature. There was some pretty kind of nasty blood off the back of the, in 2013, he comes out and says, if we play this game 10 times, we win at 5. And then there were some comments when Norvell first got there about they've had 3 head coaches in 2 years, when Florida State's had 4 in 60 years. It just so happens we fired one coach. There was some bad blood there, and then the whole COVID thing where the game gets canceled after people have traveled and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's nothing like Miami and Florida. It's like Miami for me, of the, the kind of hatred and venom, Florida, and then, Clemson somewhere down there. You want Clemson to be rated top. You want that to be a top 5 matchup every year, So.
Yeah,
I've encountered some level of, I don't want to call it hatred. In some spots it is. People are that extreme, but vitriol toward Dabo Swinney just in general across college football. And then I'm just assuming, I made an assumption that a lot of it would come from ACC teams, and obviously Florida State at the top. So,
yeah. Hey, I mean, Dabo certainly has
a lot of this stuff. A lot of the I'm sorry to cut you off, but what is it he said about NIL? We got what was that quote?
The God's name, image, and likeness.
Yes. Yeah. Speaking about Jesus Christ, I thought that was amazing. I love all that stuff. I love pretty much everything he represents about his program. He really showed a different way to do it. Was the first one to show a different way than the Saban blueprint. Because Florida State, what we did, like Jimbo was different. He had a pro style offense that was different than anybody's. But he had the 3-4 defense, the whole Saban thing. Clemson did it. I mean, he's got a slide and he's joking around and doing dances and stuff, kind of the Mac Brown way. But we didn't have access when Mac Brown was doing it at Texas. And I don't know how goofy he was compared to how he is at North Carolina. But yeah, it was different. You can have fun. And, to the portal stuff, y'all don't turn your roster over. I mean, y'all get guys in. Y'all do really good at evaluating, and you keep them there. He's always talking about the 140 guys he has on his roster. So I respect all that. But some of the stuff, how coaches do. Hugh Freeze is the worst about it. You'll ask him a question and they'll kind of preach or say something. It's like, well, just answer the question. Like this is what's going on in college football today. But no, I don't hate.
No, and hey, I get that too. And you know, if I've always said that, you know, if I was an opposing fan, like certainly like Dabo, and especially as from an outsider perspective, you know, if you're not really intimately familiar with the program and you haven't, you know, really, you don't really like consume a lot of Dabo Sweeney, you know, content. Like I can understand why, you know, people would, you know, some people get rubbed the wrong way with some of the things he says. Um, I've always said this about Dabo, because I don't always agree with everything he says, but I've never ever questioned his sincerity with how he goes about his business and how he does things. I think he's one of the most honest, you know, coaches in all of college football. He's going to tell you what he thinks, how he feels, and I think he's going to say it with conviction. And you know, because some people think it's he's fake and all that, he's doing all this for cameras. The Dabo Sweeney you see up on that podium during ACC media days and during Clemson press conferences, that is the same Dabo Sweeney that, you know, you will encounter when there's no cameras on. Like he's just a very, very outgoing and outspoken individual, and that's how he's always operated, even when he was a wide receiver coach here. And that's kind of what made him a fantastic recruiter and why he ended up getting the job, because of his ability to be personable and the sincerity at which he interacted with people. So that's how I've always seen it.
Can you tell these FSU folks out here that it's possible for Mike Norvell to change some coaches after this year and still go on to have a successful program? Because that's happened a couple times at Clemson, right? Like talk our people off the ledge, man.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, one of a head coach is only as good as the coaches that he surrounds himself with. That's something that every great coach has, in some form or fashion, you know, realized. The ones that have had sustained success, at least, you know, the Nick Sabans, the Urban Meyers, Kirby Smart is becoming that, and Dabo is another example. Like when you realize that, you know, things aren't working, you can't be so loyal to your guys that you are unwilling to, you know, make those changes and sacrifice the health of your program. So in Florida State's case, you know, I'm not, you know, intimately familiar with the program. I mean, I know I'm familiar with a lot of y'all's staff, but like, I don't know who's the problem and who's not doing their job as well. Like that's up to y'all. But like, I think Mike is ultimately going to have to, you know, self-evaluate and also evaluate his entire staff and how they go about doing things. And you have to be willing to make those changes. Dabo did that early on in his career when he got the job. He fired Billy Napier in 2010 and went and hired Chad Morris. He fires Kevin Steele. He goes out and hires Brent Venables. And you see, you know, Clemson's offense become one of the best over the last decade, and Clemson's defense becoming, you know, under Brent Venables being a consistent top 10 unit, and ultimately led to 2 national championships. So like that's with Mike, that's what he's going to have to figure out. He's like, who are the guys that, you know, I may love this guy as a person, as a coach, as a human being, but if he's not doing his job to the way that we need to be successful, then he's going to have to go. And so I think Mike will do that. I don't know Mike Norvell, but I doubt that things stay the same after this year. I think he's going to make the changes that are needed to be made, and we will see a difference next year.
I must be an oddball. I must be an oddball because my team's been kicked around 3 times by Dabo Sweeney. So I in big games. So I have reason to not like him. Yeah, I got one back in a big way, but so I've got reason not to like Dabo Sweeney, and he's my favorite coach in college football. He just is for a lot of reasons. But anyway, we got Falconer TRX. Appreciate you being here. Thanks for the super chat. Recruit and develop. Use the portal to fill the gaps. And he's pointing that toward the U, of course. One real quick one, just because this really doesn't matter for Saturday, but still, Jordan, would it made it a little bit sweeter, different, nostalgic, something if DJ was going to play in this game?
I think for some people, yeah, probably. I've kind of gone back and forth on this, as far as like how I would feel about that, because I don't have like a disdain for DJ as a person or anything like that, and it did suck to see him struggling as bad as he was, because it's something that I saw very firsthand when he was here, and I just, you could tell how much it weighs on him, because I've never questioned how hard he works and how much he cares. Wherever he is, he works to be great wherever he is, but it just has not worked out. And so, like, I think it would have been, I think from probably for a Clemson football, like, kind of catharsis standpoint, maybe it would have been nice to get that win, because, when he left Clemson, there were a lot of, narratives about, Clemson's quarterback development, and whether or not the players around, Dabo Swinney, handicapped him and stuff like that. And I think there was a level to that, some level to that. I think the personnel wasn't always the best while he was here. But I think Clemson shouldered a lot of the blame. And when he went off to Oregon State, he had an okay year, but I didn't see the massive improvement that a lot of people were saying. So, I think maybe for some Clemson fans and for the football program in general, playing DJ might have been kind of an exercising of that whole narrative. I don't want to say demons, because I feel like that's a little strong. But I think ultimately it's still, beating Florida State is always a big deal in Clemson, regardless of who the quarterback is. And with the way the game went last year, regardless of who's the signal caller, I think it's a massive deal, and a game that Clemson needs just to have that result.
What does your gut tell you? Be honest. Are you more confident with Brock starting, or than if DJ would have started?
I definitely would have been more confident with DJ starting, just because we know what DJ is. He's a fifth-year player. I mean, we've seen what he is. We've seen what he can and can't do. We've seen his limitations within the Mike Norvell offense. The things that he does well, the things that he doesn't, and plus he was here for 3 years. So I mean, we Clemson, as a staff and as coaches, know what his strengths and weaknesses are, and a lot of his teammates are still there. So I definitely would have felt more comfortable there, because again, there's always that mystique of a new quarterback that really doesn't have a ton of film out on him.
What may he do?
That makes things a little bit different as far as how you game plan at least a little bit. And so Brock has that kind of he has that novelty about him, and that's what makes it difficult. And we kind of saw that with NC State. I thought CJ Bailey, the true freshman for NC State, played a pretty admirable game, because he was thrust into action on short notice when Grayson McCall went down. And so I thought he had a better game than I was expecting. And sometimes that happens when you don't really know what you're getting from a defensive game plan standpoint.
Sorry, early on. Sorry, go ahead. I know we got to end this thing.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up here. We are proud to have Jordan part of our team here at the Voice of College Football. So we get together every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time with Tiger Paw Craven. They got a show tonight in 1 hour right here on the Clemson channel, as we are simulcasting right now. So we appreciate Jordan. You know that. Appreciate you being part of us here at the Voice of College Football and all that you do for us. And you can catch Jordan after the ball game as well on the Clemson side with the post game. And so we also, of course, thank George for delivering for us each and every Wednesday here at the Voice of College Football. Without George, we don't have a show. And so, George, appreciate you. When are you going live next time on the Renegade Report?
Boy, man, we're filling it up. We're trying to be dedicated here. We got the roast on Mondays. We were just live yesterday on Tuesday. If you didn't go check that one out with all the latest news, we'll be back live Friday at 7 Eastern. And then, of course, the post-game show, that's simulcast. And then we'll go from there. We're trying to hit 3,000 subscribers. And Jordan, dude, get with me, man. We'd love to have you on maybe Friday or something if you want to, look at the game and on our channel and talk about it. We'd love to get up. We can do something. But yeah, thank you for having me.
I think I feel like we've done I don't know, I may have been in a Twitter space with you before.
Maybe one of Chef Naeem's things last year.
Yeah.
Like,
I
when
think that
he
was
asked the
probably
question about like, do we hate Clemson and Dabo and stuff? The fan base it's like the most cordial. Like when you go to a Clemson game, vice versa, and even those faces, like, I mean, it doesn't get more cordial than that.
oh yeah.
That was Chef, or I can't even remember, Chef Naeem or whatever it is. It was pretty funny because we talked a lot of crap going into that game, and then he did that whole roast afterwards where
Oh man,
he took all the hits. That was funny.
that was a legendary night, man. There was like 700 people in there.
I may have to start one and just say whatever. All right, y'all get off on me. Y'all roast me because boy were we wrong about this season.
But yeah,
All right,
absolutely.
folks,
Shoot me a DM and we can work something out.
I'll do it, man.
All right, folks, catch George on the Renegade Report and after the ball game here on the FSU channel. And again, it's Jordan and Tiger Paw on the Clemson live show Wednesday, which is tonight, of course, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and after the ball game as well. Guys, thanks for making this happen.
Thank y'all.
Go Noles, baby.